I'm gonna use a presentation to speak, and while that gets set up, honestly, listening to Mona Lisa and also the previous panel has been highly overwhelming. Um, Working in this context, and but I'll try my best to try to give you an overview of what the police and prison systems in India for trans persons specifically look like, in terms of policy, what has been laid down, and on the basis of RTI responses we have received from 34 states and union territories, 28 states and 6 union territories. I'll be trying to sum up to a certain extent as to what could be the possible ways forward, or what could be the imagination of decarcerating the trans body, and also looking at not inclusion into prisons per se, but to basically humanizing the process of whatever carceration is even existent, whether or not carceral or the institutions of prisons and police are to be present in society, or if that is something we imagine, is something I will leave for a later time and date for discussion, and most probably for a different stage. So the title of my talk today would be Contextualizing Historical Criminalization. And next slide, please. So, the historical criminalization of the transgender communities has been for various degrees. We have the Criminal Tribes Act, we have Beggary Acts, we have the Telangana Eunuchs Act, and various other acts. And apart from that, various legislations that translated into modifications in, let us say, the police acts that are run in various different states. For example, in Karnataka, where because of the jurisdiction of the Telangana Eunuchs Act, even in the regions of Karnataka, they translated that. The provisions of the Telangana Eunuchs Act into the Police Act to register trans persons and to treat them as habitual offenders. Now, given this kind of a historical criminalization, the transgender community is many a times made vulnerable to a system of the criminal justice uh, institutions overall. The way in which trans people have interacted with the criminal justice system has always been through the lens of either regulation, governance, or registration to a large extent. Now, going forward, one major challenge that we also get to look at is a national enumeration in this accord has serious concerns of probably being misused the same way that they had been in the past. If we see the Criminal Rights Act, the Beggary Acts, and the Police Acts, which got translated henceforth. So, this is a call to a certain extent to challenge or to question why enumeration and what protections and privacies would be awarded to, or what liberties and freedoms would be protected for trans persons in the context of an enumeration, and a centralized enumeration that too. While there are conversations going on of a national registry of citizenship and a need to prove citizenship that every citizen is being made to walk on, or every resident of this country at present is being made to walk on. So it's a very difficult line to tread. Now, in that context, next slide, please. Yeah. So, the first way in which I would like to look at trans people's engagement with the criminal justice institutions is that of either survivorhood or victimization, right? The susceptibility of crime that happens on trans people is much higher because of the kind of societal stigma, trans negativity, and in general, as I'm so glad I'm following the panel that happened, the first panel that happened where Vicky spoke about. Why is it that the trans body is essentialized to their transness, and then the violence is meted out on trans bodies as a retaliation to the courage, as a retaliation to not being helpless or not being weak or to portray courage. So, following from that, the process of seeking justice, I have framed it as the marry or rapist paradox, where very similarly in society, wherever we have violence against women, specifically of a sexual kind, or um, which outrages the modesty to a certain extent. There have been trends of marrying, asking the woman to either marry the man, or considering that a viable solution to violence, which seems like a very similar context where trans people have been placed at in the process of seeking justice, where we're being asked to approach a system, which is the police, where historically the only way we have interacted with them is as criminals, right? Um, then the last part that I would like to also point here is about demanding police accountability. Demanding police accountability is an overarching topic that needs to be focused by all movements that have to do with democratic and civil rights and citizenship rights. And in that context, the specific vulnerability that trans people have, a few judgments that I'll quote here are obviously the Prakash Singh guideline. I'm sorry, I said Suresh Kumar Kaushal for some reason. uh, the Prakash Singh guidelines that were released by the Supreme Court of India in 2016 have enumerated a number of ways in which police accountability could be maintained, but as was expected and as is the norm, they were severely diluted in the process of when they translated into state laws or state action. Um, but not going much into that, I would like to go forward to the next slide. अब पुलिस will be like तो मैं क्या करूँ जॉब छोड़ दूँ but that is literally not what we are asking for. What we are trying to do, can you go to the next slide please? So this obviously raises the question as to what seems to be the way forward, or where are we thinking of what our imagination constitutes of when we think of a police being sensitive, or an institution of police being trans responsive to and trans responsive in the context that our society has placed trans people in. To understand the context and vulnerability of trans people is something that obviously is something that usually and internationally has been discussed in these three large points. One of them is obviously the recruitment in police. The A theme of diversity and inclusion within the police of trans people is considered as a sensitization of the system in general. This has happened obviously until the early 2000s. We did not have women police officers being recruited actively in the police departments. Post that, we have women police officers being recruited, but I think we have a percentage of less than 5% nationally of women police officers presently. Even out of those, women police officers are usually given non field duties, which are either administrative tasks, which are RTI wings, or which are citizen service centers, which have been opened by prison police departments. And going forward, they also are recruited into immediate response centers, such as the 100 PCR hotline, etc. Now, moving forward from the whether or not that is a way to go forward, or whether or not that sensitizes the institution of the police towards gendered violence, it does not have much empirical research to support. Even despite having women police officers, we've seen a kind of masculinization of the way in which women police officers have also dealt with cases of sexual violence, whether women specific or women cells that have been established in various different states as an immediate response center for survivors and victims of sexual violence and violence against women, have also somehow proven to be ineffective, because they have been segregated into only going to those cells. Now, the last point that I would also like to talk about is that the cognizance of gendered vulnerability inside police custody is something that exists for women to a certain extent. For example, there are norms to say that a woman accused, or even if a woman is a witness, their statement cannot be recorded at the police station. They cannot be called to the police station per se. Their statement is recorded at their place of residence. They cannot be arrested post sunset, which is the way in which it has been framed. And also, women police officers must be present while conducting the arrest, or if any kind of physical contact with the person who is accused or who's being arrested is done, it is by a woman police officer and not by a male police officer, and henceforth. Now, whether that kind of a segregation provides protection is still a question for debate, but all I'm trying to raise is that there are protections and cognizance of vulnerability. Now, I would like to just quickly make a point here with what Dr. Mrinal Satish had pointed to gender neutral rape laws to a certain extent. One thing that we also need to focus on is how evidence laws in India, specifically when it comes to violence and sexual violence, are extremely gendered, and the kind of empirical and medical evidence that is sought from survivors of sexual violence and sexual assault, abuse, and rape. Are actually, to a certain extent, might actually be irrelevant to trans bodies or how trans bodies are perceived. So whether we are ready to create policies that look at what would we look at a trans body when we are trying to medically inspect rape is a question out there for medical professionals and legal professionals working in the field. And obviously, I would like to leave this with an open-ended question of would this still be enough, which I'm myself not sure of. But going forward, if you could go to the next slide. Now, I'll speak about a report that has recently been published by the Commonwealth Human Rights Initiative, where I'm also employed. The author for the report is Mr. Arijit Ghosh and Ms. Madhurima Dhanuka. And Arijit is a former employee at CHRI and right now works as a lecturer at the OP Jindal Global University. And Madhurima Dhanuka is the head of program for the prison reforms program at CHRI. Now, I'll briefly try to touch over the data that was sought and what were the responses that were received from the 34 odd states and union territories. Could we go to the next slide? Yeah, so the scope of data largely is focused on 4 data points. We asked, are there transgender persons in your prisons? Secondly, and I'm just trying to simply put it across so I can move forward, also taking time into cognizance. The second question that we asked in the RTI was whether there were any policy frameworks that were present for the segregation of transgender persons. This is a context that I would like to place before the audience, that in most prison legislations that we are governed by, there are only male and female prisons, apart from the Delhi Police Manual, Delhi Prisons Manual. The word transgender does not surface in either police or prison manuals or legislations anywhere across the country. The third point that we asked were the number of transgender persons held. Okay, wait. Yeah, the third point that we asked were whether transgender persons were hired by prison departments. And the last point that we asked, the last data point that we sought, was regarding any kinds of trainings or awareness programs or sensitization programs. And I'll distinguish between awareness programs and training programs. Awareness programs are for prisoners. Fellow inmates who would be with transgender persons, and training programs would be for the personnel who are employed by prison departments and who are in a position of power. Now, going forward, the next slide, please. Yeah. Now, there are certain limitations of the report, obviously, and I would like to focus on that as well for a little while. One of the limitations is surely that the definition of transgender per se, this report came out at a time where the definition of transgender was being largely debated, given the Transgender Persons Rights Act and the contradiction that that held to the Nalsa judgment and the conversations around self-determination of gender identity that all this were placed in. Given that the understanding of the prison officials might also be skewed to not recognize or not take cognizance of trans people apart from very traditional transgender communities or socio-religious transgender communities such as the Hijra, Jogappa, Jogti communities, etc., and many more which I might have missed out. Now, the last point is obviously that there were a lack of responses from all prisons. Wherever the prison headquarters transferred the RTI to the various prisons, the various jails that exist within the state. Some of them responded, some of them did not. But apart from this, we'll go on to the findings of the report now. Could we go on to the next slide? Yeah, so there are 214 transgender persons, and the only point that this data makes is that trans people exist with a complete absence from policy within prisons. They are recorded as trans people, while at the same time there exists no policy to talk about uh, how do we protect the rights of trans persons or talk about trans persons within the incarcerated context. Could we go on to the next slide, please? The recording of data now, only 9 states suggested gave us written replies to state that there were, yeah, only 9 states suggested that there was recording of data of transgender persons separately apart from the binary of male and female. Also, I just want to state that, so regarding the presence of transgender persons, we sought data only for a period of 1 year, that was from 1st April 2018 to 30th May 2019. So in that 1 year, there were 214 transgender persons. I'm sorry for having missed that out initially. Now, only 9 states record the data of transgender persons separately. And this is again in contradiction to the very fact that transgender persons are missing from policy, missing from prison manuals, and missing from prison legislations. And despite that, there is a provision to maintain data on transgender persons. So that is something, yeah. So there are terminologies such as UNUC, which are recorded by the terminologies such as UNUC, which are used for transgender persons in this context, and the ePrisons website, which does this. If we could go on to the next slide. Now, the process of segregation is something that I'll just conclude with this to end with. Now, the way in which placement has happened is that either placement happens based on the gender mentioned in the court warrant. So, when the transgender person is presented in court, the court warrant, whatever gender the court warrant mentions, they directly place the transgender persons according to that gender. Now, the second way in which this placement has happened has been on the advice of the medical officer. The medical officer examines and determines the gender of the transgender persons, and this is based solely on genitalia and sex assigned at birth, and they are placed inside prisons. Now, within this, there were two different possibilities, that they were placed in either the male and female wards based on their genitalia, and the second one, which we have also heard from Mona Lisa, is that they were placed in solitary confinement, and that has been done by using a justification of safety for the transgender person involved. Go on to the next slide, please. Yeah. So a few recommendations. Obviously, recruitment and training. There have been no transgender persons who have been hired since 2014 in prison departments. And regarding trainings, there were no trainings that were conducted since 2014, despite the guidelines of the directives of the Supreme Court of India to conduct the same in all public institutions. The next slide, please. Yeah, now I'll just conclude with this. There are two major recommendations that this report specifically talks about. One is that self-determination of gender identity and compliance to NALSA is of utmost importance. And secondly, that it is very necessary that we are making law and policy for a community that has largely been ignored by lawmaking processes. And it is very necessary to consult community members and take them forward in formulating of any policy, and keep it to a large extent as responsive to trans needs and changing trans needs, and listen to the community and not try to put things out in stone and then later create problems for even the minute of changes that that the context might require. So I'll end here. Thank you so much.